Hello, welcome to the third session in our Leadership Fire Chat series. My name is Adriana Bankston. I'm currently the CEO and managing publisher for the Journal of Science Policy and Governance. And in this fireside chat series, we speak with leaders at the Journal of Science Policy and Governance about relevant and timely science policy topics and how publishing in the journal can elevate the skill sets and careers of the next generation. And we also want to thank STEMPeers for sponsoring this series. First, I want to say, if you missed our last session with Toby Smith about shaping the future of science policy, you can view that on our series page, and I'll place that in the chat as well. And today we'll have a little bit of a different session from before. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with a fellow CEO, Mehrdad Hariri, who leads the Canadian Science Policy Center, and he's also a member of the JSPG governing board. Thank you, Mehrdad, for your service on the board.
Good to be here, Adriana, with you. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. So welcome to our discussion today. So let's start off with talking a little bit about CSVC. As you know, I also have taken this role with JSPG the last few months, and I thought it would be a good opportunity to talk a little bit about what it's like, in your opinion, to be a CEO, what kind of skills you're using in your role. You've been a leader of CSVC for many years, very successfully. So I think it's a good topic for our early career authors to hear about. I know that JSPG and CSVC share a lot of common goals as far as empowering the next generation of leaders in science policy. So what can you tell us about leadership skills that you use in your role as CEO of CSVC?
All right. Thank you, first of all, Adriana, for the invitation. Pleased to be here, and I very much enjoy to be on board with esteemed colleagues at JSPG board. So first and foremost, I think the most important thing is having a vision about the path forward, about the organization, about the things that you want to do. So having vision, I think, is the most important thing. And then having passion, to be passionate about the issues, about the project, about the organization. And so that's hugely important. And once you have the vision and the passion, then you start developing, the path and from the strategic lens to see how we can move forward, how we can build the foundations, and to plan for the path forward, to build the foundations, and to build whatever is required to build an organization or to advance the objectives of an organization. Obviously, managerial skills is obviously essential for these roles, but also there are other things. I think that team building is very important, and being patient is extremely important, and having excellent interpersonal and communication skills. And I would say listen and to learn and be flexible. These are on top of my mind that, create a kind of a mixture for perhaps at least the necessary requirements for a successful leadership or executive position.
Mm-hmm. That's really helpful. So I'm wondering if you can speak to CSVC specifically, how did you sort of, start things when, we were starting out, thinking about what you wanted the vision to be? How did you put that into action, and where are you today? Where do you want to go? Kind of looking to the future.
Right. So let me tell you that I, at the beginning, of course, what I was doing the lab research, right? So I'm coming from kind of life sciences background. My first degree is Doctor of Veterinary Medicine. And then I got into cell biology and then functional genomics. So no policy, formal training whatsoever, but I was curious about the issues, about the link between science that I was doing in the lab and its relation with the people across the street. In particular, I was curious about the relation of research that we do and the impact on policies, and how it may shape the daily life of citizens, and how policymakers are being impacted or take into account and consideration the research that is being done. So that was one of my, curiosity areas that I have always been thinking how we can bring the two communities of science and policymakers closer to each other. From my perspective at the time, these two communities did not have systematic and efficient channels of communications. To my view at the time, that policy world was very separated from the research world. And I was always thinking how we can bring these two communities closer to each other. So with that thinking, with that mindset, I was thinking how we can start with a big splash to bring the attention of the communities about the fact, hey, this is important. Bringing the two communities of science and policymaking is important. After certain kind of journey of considering various functions and operations, starting a blog, magazine, etc., then I thought maybe an annual conference, a national conference, will attract people to this very important issue. So with a really empty hand, just one person started building team of volunteers to start a national conference on science policy. So that was back in 2008, and we were able to form or to hold the first science policy conference in 2009. And then, which was well received, by the way, by the community. It was a very successful endeavor. Then we were thinking, okay, so we need more institutions in science policy in Canada. And then gradually, CSVC started as a small organization, having, organizing the annual conference, which was the only and the biggest undertaking, but gradually started doing other things and expanded the activities and find a position within the community as a convener, as a connector in science policy. Now we are, a major player, at least in Canada, in science policy issues, a neutral convener. We are a non-for-profit organization, non-advocate organization. We don't take any position, but we bring organization, individual, generations, regions, we connect them. So we operate based on 4 C's, what we call it, our pillars: convening, connecting, capacity building, and catalyzing reports and analysis. So in convening, we have annual conference and lots of other online sessions, SciPol series, career campus, meet the executive, very similar to what you do right now. And connecting, we have Science Meets Parliament program, which brings scientists to Parliament Hill and connect the two community, a scientific and parliamentarian community. And also the capacity building. We have huge number of volunteers. As you may know, we are a volunteer-run organization. Every year we have somewhere between 50, 60, 70, sometimes 80 volunteers working in various operations of the center. And we have workshops, and also we have started doing more work on catalyzing reports and analysis. We have an annual magazine of science policy, as you know, and looking forward to your publication on that magazine this year, of course. Featuring the emerging leaders of science policy is very important for us. And we have an online editorial, which is regularly published online. So that's where we are right now, from the very small thinking and idea, developed, grown, and became a really important organization in the science policy landscape in Canada.
Mm-hmm. That's great. That's really impressive and great to hear. And just so from the perspective of a CEO thinking long term and how you grow an organization. So you mentioned it's grown a lot over the past few years. What are some challenges and maybe opportunities that come with this sort of growing the organization? Has that been challenging? Has that been helpful, trying to sort of think about scaling things up and kind of long-term thinking, right? So what is what are your thoughts on that?
Well, there are always challenges, and at least in my experience, the funding and resources, finding resources and funding has always been an issue. We always want to do more. We always have program ideas that we want to do more, and obviously that funding is a kind of a challenge for us. So We have grown, as you know, so we have been relatively successful, of course, in our efforts for fundraising, but funding, I think it's a challenge for most of the organization. But I must say, in addition to that, it was the challenge of science policy, promoting and working in the science policy area. And you may be surprised when I started, seriously to think about doing things about this. Science policy was an unknown territory. You cannot believe that I used to get often this comment from people that, you know what, name science policy is not attractive enough. You have to bring some innovation so that organizations, people become attracted to this. So so many times I got that, comment at the beginning. So that was perhaps a huge challenge, that science policy was not on the radar of I would say, the main discourse of the community. That change, I must say, it was a huge cultural change over the course of last decade. And science policy now, it's a major issue for almost all organizations in the science and innovation enterprises. And so that's, I would say, no longer there, fortunately. So the road is much has been paved so much in the past 10 years, I must say. And I should say it's a change of culture. But CSVC has also played a role, even small, in terms of changing that culture that science policy is important. But of course, credit goes to many other individuals, organizations, and the issues that emerged over the course of last decade.
Yeah, that's a good segue into our next section. So we want to highlight the volume that CSVC has sponsored for JSPG in November 2019. So I'll share that as well. As you know, JSPG, we've also been thinking more about expanding our outreach internationally, including in Canada, where obviously we have relationships and we want to grow those relationships and build new ones. So I'm curious if you can tell us a little bit about issues in science policy that are important in Canada, and what our listeners and authors should think about in terms of Canadian science policy.
Sure. I think, again, from the top of my head, if I can refer to, first and foremost, I would say the gap of investment in research and development, and in research and development in general, not just research in academia. I mean, research and development in private sector, in institutions, non-for-profit, and scientific and academic institutions. Canada invests 1.5% of its GDP in research and development. The average of OECD nations is 2.5% of the GDP. I guess you guys in the United States, you are above 2.5% of your GDP on research and development. As you can see, there is a 1% gap of GDP investment in research and development. That translates to about 16 to 17 billion dollars per year. And so that's a huge gap. So we have to overcome that gap. It's difficult, and it's not just government, by the way. Most of it actually, or at least half of it, should be invested by private sector in research and development. So we have to fill that gap of 1% investment in research and development. So this is, I would say, a major issue for us, and it's not an easy that can be even overcome within a few years. So we have to have a long-term planning for that. But there are many other challenges. So many, other countries have their own challenges. I think stronger coordination between federal and provincial activities in research and development is one of them. As you know, Canada is one of the most decentralized countries due to our federal system. We have a provincial and territorial government, and then we have a federal government. So it is very important for the efficiency of the research and development activities that these become more coordinated. That's an issue for us. As you may know, that we have, there was a fundamental science funding review report published 2018. which was based on the significant analysis by distinguished members of the community, including Nobel laureate Art McDonald, and also David Naylor was the chair of the panel, Remy Kurian, chief scientist, Quebec, and many others. So this was the most comprehensive report after 40 years in Canada to study the funding mechanisms in scientific and academic environment in Canada. The report published in that year, it was a significant report with 35 recommendations, 34 or 35 recommendations, and some of them are being implemented, some of them are being considered. I think addressing many of the recommendations in that report is very important in the science policy landscape in Canada. And with respect to government science policy, we had major development in the past few years. The establishment of the position of Chief Science Advisor in Canada in 2017 was a major one. And after that, the replication of departmental science advisors, which championed by our Chief Science Advisor, Dr. Mona Nemer, that each department has its own science advisor, a bit similar to the UK system of departmental science advisors. And in addition to that, the Science Integrity Project in government was a milestone, which was an important foundational work for federal government scientists. That was an important work. It is continuing and it's developing and evolving. And so I think on top of my head, these are the issues that Canadian science policy is dealing with, but I must emphasize the fact that the notion of evidence-based decision-making and the EDI, hopefully we get into that, it has also become more important, and that culture at least has become one of the main items of the science policy discourse in Canada.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very helpful. And I think for early career researchers who are thinking about writing about policies from US and other countries, it's really helpful to hear how the system works and how it's evolved and the culture change that you talked about. And we did actually have a few authors publish on Canadian science policy issues in our most recent issue about intersectional science policy. So I'm going to share that as well. And along these lines, and it was mentioned there as well that I know the government of Canada is very committed to a renewed relationship with Indigenous peoples, and you have yourself brought up and worked on DEI topics as well. What can you tell us about this area in Canadian policy?
Yeah, indeed, the renewal and renewed relationship with Indigenous peoples is a major strategic direction for government of Canada, and I think for people of Canada. We have significant work ahead of us in this area to change the course of the past and try to heal the suffering of the Indigenous nation, and address systematic, injustices to them. This should go beyond the words, and Adriana, when the significant issue as this, which has rooted deep in the past of our nation. So there must be fundamental change of the policies and fundamental change of the relationship between the Canadian people, between government of Canada and Indigenous nations. So education, and there are many layers into this, right? So it's education, economy, healthcare, and many others. But in terms of science policy, also this has become a kind of become a major item, an important strategic item for many institutions in scientific enterprises, in the funding agencies and others, all for right reasons, from support for Indigenous researchers to change, as I said, systematically policies to ensure the inclusion of Indigenous nations in various aspects of the science enterprises. 2 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, we had National Inuit Strategy on research published, which was again a milestone in this, and we're looking forward to see more of these kind of activities. As for EDI, in reference to your question, once again, I think it's a long overdue in implementing policies of EDI and making sure that organizations are adhering to EDI principles. And I must say, it's great to see that this issue has become, once again, one of the top and important priorities for many organizations in science and science and innovation ecosystem. It is now a core issue for STI community and deserve that attention as well, because once again, we have so much work to do. And the argument for that, we all know, I don't want to go into that in terms of not just for productivity and efficiency. It is a social justice, it is a human rights, and it is, this is our society, reflection of society. So we have to make sure that systematically things have changed. I must say that at CSVC, at least, this is one of our top priority. We have worked on this. We have made efforts in this to make sure in our events, in our conferences, in the things that we do, we adhere to EDI principle as number one value of CSVC. And for that many reasons, in the past few years, I must say, out of 300-400 speakers every year we have for our conferences, 56% proudly were female speakers, and we pay attention to ethnocultural diversity and marginalized community, very much in inclusion of indigenous communities into our efforts. So, I think it's an important one. It should be on the top priority of all organizations. All of us have much work to do.
Yes, I definitely agree. And as I mentioned, we've had a number of early career authors write on some of these issues. What are some of your recommendations about coming up with solutions, or can we address these issues in a systemic way? Or
right. So I think we should, Adriana, first of all, I'm not an expert in EDI, but we should change the policy, fundamentally change our policies to make sure that EDI is the number one criteria in all the policies that we set, for even for competition and all the other activities that we do. In our case, for example, in CSVC, let me just give a couple of examples. The volunteer makeup, as you know, we are a volunteer-based organization. So we see that diversity is well reflected in our organization in terms of the volunteer. But our policies with respect to setting the panels, setting the programs, we have other programs such as Science Meets Parliament and others. So the EDI policies always fundamentally show that we look at and we pay attention and we adhere to those principles and make sure it is well reflected. Whatever we do, it is well reflected of the diversity of our community. And beyond that, we have to make sure that we get out of the culture of the regular and usual basis. No, we have to go beyond our way to accommodate, to include the diversity into all of our activities. So that's going beyond, and obviously hugely important. And as I said, changing the policy. In our case, I'm not necessarily the expert in the field, but we always consult with the experts in the field and reach out to them. What else we should do, how we can make changes. And I'm sure we are a small organization, of course, but others are doing that, I know. But once again, I know one thing, that we have much work to do.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I think it's important to bring these issues to light and talk about both the challenges and opportunities and things that we think we could do. And it's nice to see the next generation also, writing about these topics and thinking about what they could do to improve. So obviously, we've been talking about here today. You have a lot of science policy knowledge. I think we always like to ask our speakers a little bit about their career path, how they got into science policy. You started talking about that a little bit and what motivated you. Can you expand a little more about your career journey?
Yeah, I think I said it at the beginning that I came from the life sciences, and what was in my mind at that time, what I was curious about and drove my attention and to this world of science policy. And what I can say that to younger generation, perhaps follow your passion. As you said, passion is extremely important, right? And be curious. Always go beyond what is in the lab or what is in your research field. And if you are interested, if you have passion for, and go beyond that. As I was, as you said, I started as a vet. My first degree, veterinary medicine, but I came to this world of science policy because I wanted to know more. I wanted to do things. I wanted to make a difference. And that's how I got to science policy and be a change maker in a small way, of course.
That's great. Yeah. Yeah, I think there's, at least in my experience, there's a lot more interest in science policy in the last few years. Like you've said, the culture has changed. There's a lot of young people that want to make a difference in specific areas, including diversity. And so what is your advice for students who want to engage in science policy? How can they get started? Do you have some advice or things they should be looking at or thinking about as they want to transition maybe from science into policy more?
I think be curious and go beyond the lab, go beyond your research field, but participate in the activities. I think that perhaps would be one of the most important or helpful things that you can do if you are in other areas, your research, but you are interested in science policy. Get engaged, get involved in volunteer with journal, with other organizations. There is a national science policy network in the US. The CSVC is in Canada. We have other actually student-run organizations, SPE and a few others. And the network of students of science policy, they're in different cities in Canada. CSVC is a huge volunteer-run organization. You can join us, and many others in different parts of the world, of course. Get engaged, participate at the conferences, listen to the podcast, to sessions, and get to know things, listen to different perspectives. And I cannot advise more than participate and get engaged in the activities, even at the volunteer level. Then that way you'll find your way. You see, oh, this is not really something that I want to know. This is exactly what I want to do. And you can get more and you can network, get to know people, individuals, organizations, and then you'll find your way.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to this scenario of, find your passion and sort of follow, I think that's part of how I ended up in this position, and that, I'm very passionate about, the next generation and empowering them in science policy. And, that's given me a lot of motivation to take on this position to, continue this mission in the next few years.
And Adriana, let me tell you another story. I always say this. One of the inspiring factors for me that really helped to solidify in terms of what I want to do was the AAAS annual meeting in February. So, I went there, and that kind of was my perhaps the first big experience in getting to be exposed to science, society, policy issues. That I said, wow, this is exactly what I want. And that was a huge experience, that big conference. And so since then, I have not missed much of the annual conferences of AAAS. But my point is that, go to the events, get engaged in the volunteer form with different activities, and test yourself, your perspective, your ideas, and see if this is something that you want to do. And if it is, believe me, you'll find your way.
Yes, I definitely agree with that. So before we close, I do want to ask you a little bit about the journal and your role on the governing board. And so what is your idea of, how the journal can help the next generation and build leaders in science policy?
Well, I think the journal is already helping and hugely and contributing to developing the future leaders of science policy. Let me tell you, first of all, I'm really pleased and enjoying being on the board and share that board with a esteemed group of individuals. It's really good. I'm really looking forward post-COVID to meet in person again with the board members. But this is huge. What journal does, it's huge because it's a unique value proposition that journal is providing, and providing a platform for new emerging scientists and ex-science policy experts, early career scientists, professionals, in other fields, to publish their research for policy application. And I think this is a unique value proposition that the journal has, especially focusing on the emerging leaders in scientists, professionals, and it's huge. Over the course of last decade, it's almost 10 years, I believe. Am I right that the journal has been existed since 2011? Am I right?
That's right. 10 years. That's right. Yeah.
That's right. So it had huge value in terms of training individuals, right? Providing platform for individuals in terms of the content, providing content to the community, and supporting younger generation scientists and policymakers. You have done a magnificent job. And I think you are already contributing with various other things that you have. I know you have some workshops, develop this series of, that online sessions. These are all huge value provided to the community, and in particular focused toward emerging early career scientists and professionals to the field of science policy. So I'm really happy that this journal exists. I'm pleased and proud to be part of the board, and whatever we can do in our capacity at CSVC supports the journal by all means, as we have done in the past and will do more in future. And we are also trying to doing things together, as you know, and very much looking forward to those. But the journal has been a significant contributor to the landscape of science policy and providing the best platform for emerging professionals in this field.
Great. Well, we really appreciate those comments. I just want to ask you one final question. Do you have any last comments you want to leave us with today before we sign off?
I just want to thank you for all the work, Adriana, you do and your team in the journal. Once again, it's a great work. And I want to thank for the opportunity for me, and very much looking forward to stay engaged with your listeners. But follow your passion, be curious, go beyond the lab, and participate in session, discussion, conferences, and get engaged in volunteer format with various science policy activities.
Great. Thank you so much, Mehrdad, for all of your remarks today. I know our listeners have learned a lot. I certainly have. And it's always great to hear the experiences of our board members as well. And I also want to thank everybody who joined us today for the fireside chat, and let you know that our next discussion is on November 3rd with Shailene Jyotishi, who is JSPG's senior advisor and former CEO. And so you can register for that here. We want to get his perspective as an advisor, and still, I think, fairly early career, but sort of in between, or sort of, emerging leader as well in his field. And we do want to hear his perspective as well. So thank you so much for joining, and see you next month.
Bye.